Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. The heat felt like my flesh was being roasted alive, the stench of burnt skin thick in the air. Yet at the same time, it was as if I were plunged into the depths of an icy lake, the chills seeping deep into my bones. I gasped awake, eyes snapping open, breath coming in sharp bursts, my forehead slick with cold sweat. The dim yellow light, the old wooden tables and chairs, the faded "Serve the People" slogan on the wall, and the heavy scent of grease and cafeteria food. All of it rushed at me at once. The noise of chattering voices filled my ears. Captain Carter is young and promising, one of our district's most famous war heroes. Miss Morgan, you're really lucky. That's right, Evelyn. Captain Carter's parents aren't in good health. They've been hoping for a gentle, well-educated daughter-in-law to come home and take care of them. The words, the scene, all of it felt painfully familiar. I lowered my head and looked at my hands resting on my knees, young, pale, smooth, faintly glowing with pink light. They hadn't yet turned rough and red from years of hard labor and cold water. I was back. Back 20 years ago, spring 1975, the military district cafeteria, the matchmaking dinner. Across from me sat a man in a brand new military uniform, handsome, upright, with sharp features and a glimmer of calculation hidden behind his eyes. His name was Andrew Carter, the man who in my previous life had drained me to the bone and allowed others to drag me into hell. Beside him sat a woman in a floral blouse, smiling warmly. Yet every word out of her mouth was a subtle reminder that I should sacrifice myself for the greater good. Quit my job, return to Andrew's hometown, and take care of his paralyzed parents. She was one of today's matchmakers and Andrew's distant cousin, Martha. In my last life, I had been blinded by those seemingly kind words. Filled with admiration for a hero and yearning for family life, I had nodded, sealing my fate. I gave up my beloved job as a high school teacher and returned to that poor remote mountain village to care for his cruel, demanding in-laws, people who cursed and struck me at the slightest provocation. At first, Andrew sent $15 home each month, then $10, then nothing. His letters came less and less often. I stayed alone in that crumbling clay house, working through the days, staring blankly at the oil lamp at night, my youth slipping away until my hair turned gray. When both of his parents finally died, I wrote to Andrew, full of hope, asking to join him at his post, but there was no reply. Instead, a woman named Susan Lee came to my door, claiming to be the wife of one of Andrew's fallen comrades. Pretending to help, she hired men to ambush me on the road. They beat me unconscious and sold me deep into the mountains of the Southwest, to a group of 8 bachelor hunters. That was true hell. Locked in a dark, airless woodshed, treated like an animal, humiliated and violated again and again, I became nothing more than a tool for their violence and their desire to reproduce. In less than 2 years I died in hatred, starved, broken, nothing but skin and bone. The burning rage that had consumed me in death now roared back to life inside my chest, molten and suffocating. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, using the pain to steady my mind. My gaze swept past the matchmaker, still chattering about Andrew's virtues, past Andrew himself, who already looked at me like I was something he owned, and landed on a man sitting alone by the window. He wore a plain military uniform without a cap. His posture was straight as a pine, his features sharp and cold, his expression unreadable. Though he sat silently, a powerful, forbidding aura surrounded him, one that warned others to stay away. He didn't belong in this noisy cafeteria. Lucas Jennings, Andrew Carter's direct superior. He was already a regiment commander at a young age, born into a powerful family, brilliant and capable. Countless female soldiers and performers admired him. Yet his reserved, unapproachable nature kept everyone at a distance. People whispered that during a top-secret mission the previous year, he'd been severely injured. Though he'd survived, he had lost the ability to have children. In my previous life, Lucas had never married and lived out his days alone. But I knew a secret, one I'd only learned after my death when my wandering spirit overheard it by chance. Lucas Jennings's injury wasn't what people believed. He had only been injured while covering for his comrades. The wound hit a vital area that required long-term rest and recovery. But the story had been twisted and spread from mouth to mouth, turning into wild rumors. In truth, he had eventually fathered a child. But that child's fate had been tragic. Yet at this moment none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was the only one here capable of suppressing Andrew Carter, and perhaps the only one who could give me a sliver of hope. Miss Morgan, the matchmaker's impatient voice snapped me back. Child, what are you daydreaming about? Captain Carter is talking to you. Andrew forced a smile, one he probably thought looked warm and gentle. Evelyn, what do you think? I know asking you to quit your job and return to my hometown is unfair, but my parents are getting old and their health isn't good. As their son, I must put filial duty first. Don't worry. Once things settle down here, I'll bring you to join me. I'll even find you another job then. The same old lines. It was those very words, dripping with false sincerity, that had deceived me in my previous life. I lifted my head slowly. My face was expressionless, but my eyes gleamed like shards of ice, burning with hatred as they locked on Andrew. Something flickered in his gaze, a flash of unease. Still duty first, huh? I said, my voice crisp but laced with bitter mockery. Captain Carter, you really are the model's son. The matchmaker hurried to smooth things over. Of course, Captain Carter is well known for his filial piety. Then, since Captain Carter is such a devoted son, I cut her off sharply, my voice rising, echoing through the cafeteria and silencing the entire room. Why doesn't he transfer out of the army and go home to serve his parents himself? Feed them, clean up after them, wash their clothes, cook their meals? Or is it that he can't bear to take off that uniform, can't bear to leave the excitement outside the military base? Andrew's face turned instantly red, his body stiffening as he shot to his feet. Evelyn Morgan, you're talking nonsense. Nonsense. I stood as well. Though I was slender, I stood straight, radiating defiance. You're asking me to quit a stable teaching job, return to your poor remote hometown, and serve your paralyzed parents while sending me only $10 a month for living expenses. Tell me, Andrew Carter, are you looking for a wife or a maid who costs you nothing? Or maybe you're just eager to get rid of me so you can continue your little romance with Susan Lee, the so-called wife of your fallen comrade. The entire cafeteria erupted. What? Susan Lee? The one who's always visiting the base? $10 a month? Even apprentices make more than that. And she has to take care of 2 paralyzed elders. My God, I can't believe Captain Carter is that kind of man. The waves of gossip crashed through the hall. Andrew's face darkened to a furious purple-red. Shock, rage, and humiliation twisted his expression as his secret was exposed before everyone. You liar, Evelyn Morgan. You slander me. I'll shut that mouth of yours. He lunged forward, reaching for me. But just as his hand brushed my sleeve, I lifted my leg and kicked with all my strength, my foot connecting hard with his shin. I had put on a pair of leather shoes, especially for this matchmaking dinner. The toe was solid and sharp. Andrew cried out in pain, stumbling backward several steps before crashing into the table behind him. Dishes and bowls shattered on the floor with a loud clatter. The entire room froze. No one had expected that this soft-spoken, gentle-looking teacher could be so fierce. I didn't even glance at Andrew, who was grimacing in pain. With everyone staring in stunned disbelief, I turned on my heel and strode toward the table by the window. I stopped in front of Lucas Jennings. The man lifted his gaze, those dark, unreadable eyes calm and deep as an abyss, showing no emotion whatsoever, as if the chaos that had just unfolded had nothing to do with him. My heart pounded wildly, threatening to burst from my chest. I knew I was taking a gamble. I was gambling on a slim, fragile chance. Gambling that this man might not be as cold and unfeeling as he looked. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady, and firm, cutting through the entire cafeteria. Captain Jennings, I said, I've heard about you from others, and I'm sure you've heard about me. I don't care about the rumors. I paused, my heart pounding in my chest, then asked each word like it was carved in stone. Would you marry me? Time stopped. The noise, the whispers, even the sound of people breathing, all of it vanished. Every gaze turned toward us. The woman standing and the man sitting by the window. Lucas Jennings's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his teacup. He raised his eyes and for the first time truly looked at me. He was young, maybe in his early 20s. His skin pale, his features sharp and refined, the kind of quiet handsomeness that carried an air of authority. I, on the other hand, looked like a typical Southern girl. Soft features, calm expression. But right now there wasn't a trace of timidity or shyness in my eyes, only fierce determination. The kind of resolve that comes after living through ruin and death and finding fire again in the ashes. My gaze burned bright and steady, hot, alive, even a little wild. He had seen my kick just now, fast and precise. I could tell he'd noticed. For the first time, I caught a flicker of something behind that calm, icy exterior, a faint ripple spreading across his long, frozen surface. Everyone around us held their breath. Everyone knew Lucas Jennings was as untouchable as stone. Countless women, performers, nurses, clerks, had tried and failed to catch his eye. And now this young teacher, who just moments ago had kicked Captain Carter in front of everyone, was proposing to him. It was shocking, unheard of. There was no way he would agree. Surely he'd turn cold and walk away. Andrew Carter, clutching his throbbing leg, glared at me with hatred. When he heard my words, his face twisted in fury and humiliation. "Evelyn Morgan, do you have no shame?" he spat. But when his eyes met Lucas's cold warning glance, the rest of his insult died in his throat. His face turned ashen. Lucas's gaze returned to me. My hands trembled slightly and my lips had gone pale, but I kept my eyes locked on his, unwavering, waiting for his judgment. He set down his teacup with a faint clink. Then, under everyone's stunned stare, he stood up slowly. He was tall, imposingly tall. Even though I wasn't short, I barely reached his shoulder. The moment he rose, the quiet force of his presence filled the space, his aura sharp and commanding, every bit the soldier he was. He looked down at me. His voice was low, not loud, not soft, but steady and impossible to disobey. "All right. Just one word." But it hit like thunder, shaking the entire cafeteria into chaos once again. "What?" Captain Jennings agreed. "Am I hearing things? What's happening?" The breath I'd been holding burst free. The tightness in my chest loosened so suddenly that the edges of my vision went dark for a second. My knees wavered, and before I could stumble, a strong, calloused hand caught my arm. His hand was warm, solid, and steady, and through the thin fabric of my sleeve, a strange calm seeped into me. "Let's go," Lucas said simply. His tone was cool, but he didn't release my arm. "We'll get the marriage certificate." He didn't even glance at Andrew Carter, whose face was now pale and frozen with disbelief. Instead, Lucas walked me straight through the silent crowd and out the cafeteria doors. The sunlight outside was bright, almost blinding. I narrowed my eyes against the glare, feeling the warmth soak into my skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could truly breathe. I had taken the first real step toward changing my fate. Everything afterward went smoother than I could have imagined. Lucas Jennings was as decisive as his reputation suggested. He took me directly to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The staff there were visibly startled when they saw him, a soldier in full uniform, accompanied by me, my eyes still faintly red from tears that were equal parts fury and emotion. But when they saw our documents were all in order, they said nothing. The whispers followed us anyway. "The cold-faced Captain Jennings is actually here to get married." Within minutes it was done. I stood there holding the thin red certificate with trembling fingers. My name was printed beside his. Evelyn Morgan and Lucas Jennings. "It's not Captain Carter," Lucas said in a businesslike tone. "You'll stay in the barracks. Applying for family housing takes time. Stay at the guest house for now. I'll have the communications officer help bring your things." "No." I took a deep breath, forcing down the tide of emotions. "I don't have much. My things are in the school dormitory. I can go fetch them myself. Thank you for today." Lucas stopped walking and looked back at me, his gaze deep. "Thank me for what?" he asked. "Thank you for being willing to marry me." I lifted my chin and met his eyes calmly. "I know I'm pretty and impulsive, but I'm serious. I will try to be a good wife." Lucas stared at me for a few seconds as if trying to read something from my face, then gave a faint nod. "No one will bully Lucas Jennings's wife." That simple sentence tightened the ache in my nose and brought a sting to my eyes. In my previous life I had been utterly alone, bullied until the end with no one to stand up for me. In this life, at my lowest and most desperate hour, this man had given me a name and a promise. Andrew Carter, Susan Lee. Just wait. I, Evelyn Morgan, am back. What you owe me I will take back piece by piece. Principal and interest. News that I had kicked the matchmaking candidate and then married my aloof superior spread through the military district like wildfire. Andrew Carter became the butt of everyone's private jokes. In a rage, he smashed things in the dormitory, eyes bloodshot, unable to believe that the usually mild Evelyn Morgan could suddenly be someone else, and even more puzzled as to why Lucas Jennings would step in to clean up his mess. "Don't be angry, Guang," Susan cooed when she heard. "She's not worth it. Some loose woman like that isn't worth your trouble." Susan Lee rushed over as soon as she got the news. Her words honeyed while calculation hid behind her eyes. "You've hooked a prize now," she whispered. "Lucas Jennings won't hold out. He's no good in bed. If she married him, she'll be a lonely wife. You hang on to me and you'll have a real wife." Andrew pulled her into his arms, teeth clenched. "Anyone who makes me lose face like this, they'll be hell to pay. And Jennings, he's deliberately making things hard for me." Susan nestled against him and traced idle circles on his chest. "Calm down. Now that he's gone, we can be together openly," she added, stumbling over her words with forced excitement. "I think I might be pregnant." Andrew blinked, startled. "If it's mine, of course it's yours." Susan gave him a triumphant little slap on the arm. Who else would the baby be claimed by but him? At that moment, Andrew needed a way to strike back at me and at Lucas, and Susan needed a secure meal ticket. Both of them were quick to seize the chance. Their plans hatched fast. Marriage would prove Andrew's virility and regain his honor, and Susan would secure her position. Her eyes flashed with private satisfaction at the thought that once Andrew publicly acknowledged the child, everything would be settled. On the other hand, Lucas's efficiency was remarkable. Within a few days, the family housing was approved and neat, spacious quarters were allocated to us. I had very few things, only a few clothes faded from washing and a handful of books. So I quietly unpacked in our new home and started to plan. I couldn't rely solely on Lucas. I needed my own work and my own path. But for now, the most important thing was to stabilize this marriage and take revenge on those who had wronged me. Lucas was busy and often away, but every time he returned, he brought food and supplies. Though Lucas didn't talk much, he never neglected me in action. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. There was a faint trace of steam rising from him like he'd just taken a shower. I was sitting under the lamp reading a high school textbook I borrowed from the library. When I sensed him enter, I grew a little nervous and stood up quickly. "You're back. Have you eaten yet? I'll heat up dinner for you." "I've eaten," he said simply, taking off his jacket and hanging it on the rack. His eyes drifted toward the book in my hands. "What are you reading?" "Nothing much, just looking through something," I said quickly, instinctively hiding the book behind me. He didn't press further. Instead, he stepped closer. His tall frame cast a heavy shadow across me, his presence filled with quiet, masculine strength. My heartbeat quickened. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and even. "Yes, we're married," he stated plainly. "I know." He moved a step closer, raising his hand to lift my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. His gaze was deep, dark as a winter lake. Yet there seemed to be fire burning somewhere in its depths. "Fulfilling marital duties is your right," he said quietly. "And my responsibility." My face burned instantly, the heat rushing up to my ears. I wasn't a naive girl. The memories from my past life, the humiliation, the violence, rose up and made my body tense without thinking. Lucas noticed my stiffness. His expression flickered, softening for a brief second. But then I forced myself to breathe and relax. I had chosen this marriage. I knew this day would come. And the man in front of me was not Andrew Carter. He was not one of those beasts in the mountains. He was Lucas Jennings, the man who had given me a second chance at life. I drew in a deep breath and met his gaze again. My voice trembled slightly, but I tried to sound calm. "I understand." Lucas studied me for a few seconds. Then, without another word, he leaned down and lifted me into his arms. "Ah!" I gasped, instinctively wrapping my arms around his neck. He carried me steadily into the bedroom. The light went out. Moonlight slipped through the cracks of the curtain, outlining the strong, angular shape of his body. His movements weren't gentle. They were decisive, confident, carrying the discipline of a soldier, but neither were they rough. It felt as if he were exploring, testing, confirming something. I closed my eyes, letting the unfamiliar rush of sensations wash over me, pushing the ghosts of my past life deep into the corners of my mind. This time it was different. It had to be different. The rumors about his old injury, about how he was no longer a real man, he disproved every one of them that night. By the end, my entire body felt weak, trembling from exhaustion. I drifted into sleep, half conscious of someone wiping my skin with a warm towel. His movements were clumsy, not practiced but careful, almost tender. I leaned toward that warmth and sank into a deep sleep. Days flowed by quietly. I gradually adapted to life in the military compound. I enrolled in night classes run by the base to prepare for my teacher certification exam again. Lucas remained busy, often gone for days, but whenever he was home, he silently helped with chores and occasionally asked about my studies. He wasn't a man of many words, but his presence gave me a solid sense of belonging. What surprised me most was that beneath his cold, stoic exterior, his desire in our marriage was intense yet controlled. Over time, he seemed to instinctively learn how to make me feel pleasure, too. That serious, sharp-edged face of his would flush faintly red in the heat of passion, sweat sliding down his jawline in a way that was startlingly seductive. Outside, people's gossip about our nominal marriage soon died down. One morning, when I went to the supply store and accidentally pressed a hand to my sore lower back, the healthy glow on my face said everything that needed to be said. Meanwhile, Andrew Carter and Susan Lee's situation was a storm of chaos. They had rushed into marriage and Susan, emboldened by the child in her belly, began acting arrogantly, complaining that Andrew didn't bring home enough money and picking fights every day. The next day, Susan Lee began complaining that the family housing was too shabby. She argued with every neighbor around them until the entire courtyard was sick of her. At first, Andrew Carter had felt proud. He thought marrying her and expecting a child gave him face. But soon, the constant noise and her temper exhausted him. Coupled with the heavy training load at work, he started coming home later and later. Susan, unable to bear the loneliness and confident in her looks, began an affair with a man named Jake, who ran a small shop near the military district and claimed to be a retired soldier. Jake was smooth-tongued and good at flattery. He often slipped her scarce treats, candies, beauty creams, imported cigarettes, and sweet-talked her until she was giddy with satisfaction. Before long, she was spending Andrew's stipend and savings on him, pouring everything she had into her secret lover. When Andrew occasionally noticed that the household accounts didn't add up, he questioned her. Susan would burst into tears, insisting she'd spent the money on nutrition for the baby, his family's precious grandchild. Every time, he would sigh and drop the matter. One evening, as I was returning from night school, I ran into Susan Lee at the gate of the family compound. Her belly was already rounded with pregnancy, her face painted with smug satisfaction. "Well, if it isn't Miss Morgan," she said sweetly. "I heard you're still attending night school. My, how hard-working of you. Then again, you have to be, don't you? Married to a man like that. You'd better make an effort, or how will you live in the future? Not like me. Once I have the baby, Andrew said he'll get me a nice, easy job with the performing troupe." I looked at her, at that familiar false, poisonous smile, and memories of my past life came flooding back. The betrayal, the despair, the pitiful hands that pushed me into hell. Hatred slithered through me like a venomous snake gnawing at my heart. Yet I smiled faintly. "That's wonderful," I said evenly. My gaze swept deliberately toward her swollen belly. "Congratulations, but don't rush about work just yet. It's more important to focus on giving birth safely. After all, Captain Carter isn't young anymore. He must have been waiting a long time for this child. It better be a boy, right?" Susan's smile froze. For an instant, panic flickered in her eyes. "Of course it's a boy," she said too quickly. "The hospital already confirmed it." "That's good," I replied with a polite nod. Without another glance, I walked past her. But as soon as I turned away, my smile faded, hardening into ice. "Enjoy it while you can, Susan. That child in your belly isn't Andrew's, and we both know it." As I walked, my thoughts turned darker. Jake Xiang. Yes, I remembered hearing whispers about him after my death in that other life. He wasn't just some shopkeeper. His background was far more complicated. A few months later, Susan gave birth to a big, healthy baby boy. Andrew was overjoyed. He threw a lavish celebration, desperate to show the entire military district that he finally had a son. He even sent an invitation to Lucas Jennings purely to rub it in. Lucas tossed the invitation straight into the trash. But I smiled when I saw it. Why not? I said lightly. A happy occasion. Shouldn't we attend? On the day of the full month celebration, Lucas and I went together. He, as always, wore that cool, impassive expression that kept everyone at a distance. I, on the other hand, dressed simply but elegantly. Next to the weary, shapeless Susan Lee, I looked radiant in comparison. I handed Andrew a small silver longevity locket, smiling warmly. Congratulations, Captain Carter. The baby looks strong and healthy. He really does take after you. I said it gently, but my gaze lingered, first on the baby, then on Andrew, carrying a subtle, almost imperceptible edge. First, Andrew didn't think much of it. But the longer he looked, the more uneasy he became. The child was chubby, yes, but something about the eyes, the shape of the brows, it didn't quite resemble him. In fact, it looked a little too much like Jake Seong, the man who often stopped by to deliver things. Once that thought appeared, it grew wild and uncontrollable. Susan noticed Andrew staring at the baby, his expression shifting. Panic rose in her chest. She quickly stepped forward, snatching the child from his arms with a forced laugh. Oh, babies change every day. You can't tell who they look like yet. Around them, several guests had already started whispering, sneaking curious glances at the child. The smile on Andrew's face finally cracked, and just then I suddenly felt a wave of nausea. Covering my mouth, I gagged a few times, my body trembling. Lucas, sitting beside me, immediately reached out to steady me, his voice low and urgent. Evelyn, what's wrong? The sharp lines of Lucas's face softened for the first time. What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? I caught my breath, a blush rising to my cheeks. Shaking my head, I murmured softly, almost embarrassed. No, it can't be. I might be pregnant. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden quiet of the room, every word carried clearly to the people nearby. What? Captain Jennings's wife is pregnant? Seriously? I thought they said Captain Jennings. How could it be fake? Just look at how nervous he is. Oh my God, that's wonderful news. In an instant, every bit of attention shifted away from Andrew Carter and his questionable son, turning toward Lucas and me. Andrew watched as we were surrounded by sincere congratulations, laughter, and warmth. Then he looked down at the child in his arms, at that little face that no longer seemed to resemble him, and at Susan Lee beside him, whose eyes flickered with guilt. A rush of shame and fury surged to his head, leaving him lightheaded with rage. He had gone to such lengths to show off his son, and now that son might not even be his. Meanwhile, the man he had mocked, who had married the woman he'd discarded, was going to be a father. It was a humiliation worse than death. The full month celebration ended in chaos. On the way home, Lucas held my hand tightly, his palm burning with heat. Is it true? He asked quietly. There was a faint strain in his tone, something like restrained hope. I leaned against his solid arm, feeling the strength radiate from him, and a sense of calm settled deep in my chest. We'll find out tomorrow, I said softly. I'll go to the hospital to confirm. I remembered all too well. This was around the time in my previous life when Lucas had been injured during a mission because of Andrew's mistake. The wound hadn't been fatal, but it had taken him months to recover. Yet this time, because of me, because Andrew was distracted by his own domestic disasters, Lucas had completed that same mission without incident. And if my calculations were right, this child had come at the perfect moment. The next day, the hospital results came back. I was pregnant with twins. The news spread through the military district like wildfire. For the first time, the ever-cold-faced Captain Jennings smiled, a real visible smile. Though he remained as restrained as ever, the joy in his eyes was impossible to hide. He brought me home with extraordinary care, as if I were something fragile. From that day on, he forbade me from doing anything remotely strenuous. Every chore was his responsibility. At night, he would subconsciously pull me into his arms, one hand resting protectively over my stomach. Feeling his warmth and protection, I couldn't stop the bittersweet tears that pricked at my eyes. In stark contrast, Andrew Carter's home turned into a battlefield. After the fiasco of the baby's celebration, Andrew couldn't look at his son without a wave of irritation or at Susan Lee without suspicion. He began to quietly investigate her relationship with Jake Seong. The more he learned, the colder his heart grew. Susan was spending money recklessly, far more than what he gave her. And yes, she was often sneaking off while he was away on duty, meeting Jake in secret. Their fights became frequent and violent, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. They became a laughingstock. One evening, during a particularly vicious argument, Andrew shoved her in a fit of anger. Susan fell backward, hitting her head on the edge of a cabinet. Blood streamed down her forehead as she screamed threats. She'd report him to the commander. She shouted. He deserved the humiliation. He was a cuckold. The baby wasn't his. Andrew lost control. He struck her. And once that first blow landed, there was no stopping the cycle of violence. Susan's days turned to torment. The more he beat her, the more she clung to Jake, craving the illusion of tenderness and revenge. She funneled even more of Andrew's money into Jake's hands, money that Jake used for his own shady dealings. Time slipped by. My belly grew round and full, swelling like a balloon. Lucas turned down as many assignments as he could to stay home and care for me. The cold-faced soldier had somehow learned to cook nourishing soups, to sew tiny baby clothes with clumsy, crooked stitches, and every night he would sit beside me reading aloud from children's books to my stomach, calling it prenatal education. Watching him so serious and awkward yet utterly devoted, I couldn't help but laugh often. 10 months of pregnancy passed quietly, and at last the day of birth arrived. I gave birth to a pair of healthy twins, a boy and a girl. My son came first, his cry strong and steady. Moments later my daughter followed, delicate and beautiful. Lucas held the 2 tiny, soft bundles in his arms, his usually steady hands stiff with nervousness, his eyes faintly red. He leaned down and pressed a solemn, tender kiss on my sweaty forehead. Rage boiled through him. This man had stolen his wife, his money, his dignity. He would end it with his own hands. But just as he raised his weapon to fire, Jake spun around as if he'd grown eyes in the back of his head. His movements were unnaturally fast, like a ghost. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Andrew's wrist, wrenching the gun aside. "I've been waiting for you, Captain Carter," Jake said coolly. The charm and difference he'd once shown were gone, replaced by cold mockery and unmistakable menace. "Thanks for the intel. Without you, we couldn't have gotten what we needed so easily." Andrew's pupils shrank. "You? Who the hell are you?" Jake gave a short, low laugh. "Doesn't matter. Not like you'll live long enough to tell anyone." He leaned in close, whispering something into Andrew's ear. Words only the two of them could hear. Andrew's eyes went wide, his face draining of all color. You're a spy and you have AIDS, syphilis." The world seemed to tilt. His mind went blank, his body cold as ice. Jake wasn't just a traitor. He was an infected spy, which meant Susan, who had been with him night after night, and their child. Jake's smile twisted with malice. "That's right," he sneered. "Your lovely wife shared my bed plenty of times, and from what I've heard, things between you two haven't been so harmonious, have they?" Jake's grin deepened, the cruelty in his tone twisting like a knife. "Maybe you should get yourself checked, Captain Carter. Never know what you might be carrying." Andrew Carter snapped. The last thread of sanity inside him broke. He'd been humiliated, cheated on, robbed of his money, his dignity, and now he might even be infected with a filthy disease. Worse yet, it was all his doing. He'd been the one to let the wolf into his own home, to hand information to a spy with his own 2 hands. Terror, fury, and shame crashed through him like a wave of fire. His mind went blank. With a hoarse scream, he lunged at Jake, roaring, "I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" His shouting drew attention immediately. Enemy gunfire zeroed in on his position. Bang, bang, bang. Pain exploded in his chest and leg. Blood gushed from his wounds, and he stumbled backward, collapsing to the ground. Through the haze of pain, he saw Jake Song slip away, vanishing into the darkness. Moments later, the enemy guns turned fully on him. "Cover fire!" Lucas's calm, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Pull him back now." Under the cover of suppressing fire, 2 soldiers dragged Andrew's bleeding body to safety. But the damage was done. The mission failed. The leak in Andrew's reckless disobedience had led to heavy casualties. Although they managed to recover some intelligence, the cost was devastating. Andrew took several bullets, none fatal, but severe enough to destroy his leg and nearly his life. He was rushed back to the military hospital, hovering between life and death. When he woke, he was greeted not by doctors but by the officers of the military tribunal. Preliminary interrogation, isolation, investigation. During his isolation, he was ordered to undergo a full medical examination. Then came the report, his personal death sentence, HIV positive, syphilis positive. He stared at the paper, trembling. No, that's impossible. The scream that tore from his throat sounded more like an animal than a man. He smashed everything within reach, raving like a madman. But news like that never stayed buried for long. Soon, whispers spread through the entire military district. Captain Carter, mission failed. Gravely injured, possibly disabled, infected with 2 venereal diseases. The gossip spread like wildfire. When Susan Lee heard it, she collapsed on the spot. Clutching the child, who by now looked more and more like Jake Song, her face turned ashen. She knew it was over. Andrew would never forgive her. The army would never tolerate a spouse like her. And Jake, she thought of him and felt a chill run through her. She rushed to the hospital for testing, desperate and terrified. The result was the same, positive. In despair, Susan gathered whatever valuables remained in the house, grabbed the baby and tried to flee. But she was already under surveillance. Authorities caught her before she reached the station. Her crimes went far beyond infidelity and the destruction of a military marriage. She was now implicated in a spy case. As for Andrew, he lay in his hospital bed, consumed by pain and disgrace. His body broken, his name ruined, infected with the same diseases as his wife's lover. The mission had failed. He had nothing left, only humiliation. He was expelled from service, but no one wanted him. Not the army, not his peers. Because of his injuries and his illness, he was sent back to his impoverished mountain hometown, where a distant, resentful relative reluctantly took him in. He lived out his days in misery, shunned, pied, spat on, a slow, shameful existence that was worse than death. Susan, convicted for espionage involvement, was sentenced to prison. She wasted away behind bars, sick and broken, every day dragging on like a year. Meanwhile, in the bright warmth of a spring afternoon, laughter filled the Jennings household. Our twins, our beautiful boy and girl, had just turned 1. My son Ryan toddled across the courtyard, chasing a colorful rubber ball with unsteady steps. My daughter Lily sat on a soft blanket nearby, babbling happily as she stacked wooden blocks. I rested on a chair, my belly gently rounded again. I was pregnant once more. Lucas sat beside me on the porch, a file in his hands, though his gaze never left us. His usually cold eyes softened as he watched me and the children. We'd heard bits of news about Andrew Carter and Susan Lee, their downfall, their ruin, but none of it mattered anymore. Evil meets its own end eventually. What goes around comes around. Retribution never misses its mark. Mommy B. Ryan toddled over, clutching the brightly colored ball in his chubby hands, and stuffed it into mine. I took it, smoothing my palm over his soft hair, my smile warm and content. Lucas set aside the file he had been reading and walked over. With one arm he effortlessly lifted our son. With the other he slipped his hand around my shoulders, his touch steady and protective. "You're tired," he said in his low, gentle voice. "Go inside and rest." I leaned into his chest, feeling the familiar warmth and strength that had become my refuge. Watching our healthy, lively children and feeling the subtle movements of new life within me, I thought of the darkness of my past life, the despair, the pain, and the bitter downfall of my enemies. Peace, deep and complete, settled over me. I looked up, meeting Lucas's deep smiling eyes. "I'm not tired," I whispered. "Having you and the kids? That's enough." Sunlight poured over the courtyard, golden and warm, stretching our shadows across the ground, intertwined, inseparable. The days were calm, the future bright.